Hello, you're listening to the Small Business Show. I'm your host, Swire Ho, the promo guy. My guest today is Tobin Lehman. He's the founder of New North. They're an award-winning digital marketing agency dedicated to help B2B technology firms. Good morning, Tobin.
Good morning, Swire. Nice to meet you.
Would you mind to tell the viewers a little bit more about what you do and also talk about your new books, Ride the Tornado?
Wonderful. So, I'm the principal of an agency called New North. We are a digital marketing agency for B2B tech firms. So what that means in kind of normal speak is that we do a lot of branding and lead generation efforts for tech firms, specifically in the B2B space, business to business space. So a lot of people ask well, how's that different than just being a normal marketing firm or B2C? Typically, we're dealing with enterprise type clients or clients again selling into a more complex or kind of business scape where we're not selling to one individual consumer, but we're actually selling to a buying group or a kind of division or things like that, where there's multiple influencers, multiple decision makers in that process. So the sale is not just convincing one mind, it's convincing many. And so that is then becomes into lead generation, where we do paid media, things like that, and also in branding work to define kind of invoice and things like that as well. So we really help companies really reach out and kind of grow their business through those two efforts.
Okay.
And so, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to ask you that question, but then you answered already. The difference in traditional marketing agencies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a bit different. And that kind of leads into what really got us into kind of the Ride the Tornado, the RTX Framework. So you mentioned the book. I'll just speak a minute about that. So Ride the Tornado really is the kind of encapsulation of our kind of decades of work into this space of how we dynamically reach people in the marketing space. As you well know, marketing is always evolving because it's all about attention. And so how do we kind of capture attention? How do we capture it the right ways? And in the space we're in, attention is really highly coveted. It's hard to get attention to B2B space, even in the B2C space in many cases. And so to use marketing effectively means we need to understand what we're doing. We need to measure it. We also need to experiment, because the reality is once one channel or one method of communication becomes hot, becomes kind of the thing, everyone swarms to it, and it's no longer a place to capture any attention. So you have to iterate, you have to kind of move away, you have to experiment. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you do that well? How do you do that intelligently? How do you do that when you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on marketing budget? And that's where the RTX framework comes in, to kind of successfully kind of experiment and use data to influence that process and slowly move the needle towards new and exciting things.
Okay, let's break it down a little bit, because you touched on a few things. And let's start with experimentation in marketing. So as you were saying, in marketing, you got to spend money, right? You either buying ads or writing content or hire an agency like New North. But people wanted to get it all, right? I'm spending money, right? I want to market everyone. So by experimentation, can you touch a little bit more into that? And what do you mean by experimenting?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so this is really I think the marketer's soapbox, right? Is that we're in a place where we're asked to do something. We're asked to make a product viable into a market. We're to experiment and to push those things out there. And so for experimentation for us is really about discovering what the right channel is in the next channel, or the most effective channel to communicate your message to the consumer, right, to the market. And so the reality is, once the blog posts are written, the hot things to do this year, once all the YouTube videos are out there on the best way of using email or that's old news, right? I mean, once the bloggers are writing about it, once everyone's publishing their insights, they've already done it, and now they're publishing their thoughts about it. It's no longer the cutting edge kind of thing. So the question becomes, how do you discover something new? How do you innovate? How do you create something new? Or how do you kind of push the envelope, if you will, in marketing? And that really comes through experimentation. So for us, experimentation really is a process of kind of guided discovery of the viability of a marketing channel. That's a long, technical, detailed kind of answer, but really it's like, how do we try things smartly, right? How do we do things in a smart manner? So if we're going to push into something like Clubhouse, or we're going to push into using more paid ads, or we're going to buy placements, or we're going to do physical goods, trade show goods. Like if we're going to do all these different places, how do we kind of put our foot in the water? How do we experiment with these in a way that's smart, where we don't turn around in 6 months, 12 months and say, well, did it work? We don't know, right? But that's also the reality of spending that kind of money. And so every business has a different scale of budget. And so the question around experimentation is really, how do we do this well? How do you do it right for you? And how do you do it in a way that gives you feedback along the way, so you're not $20,000 or $200,000 or $2 million down a road at the end of a year and you realize that was money that was wasted. There's ways to figure that out before you get to that point. And that's really what experimentation and a lot of the RTX framework's about.
But I could think of a question or kind of like a resentment, like pushback, you even call it, for businesses, whatever that works for them for a long time. Let's say I always get more business at trade show, or when I buy Google ads, or whatever that they are used to getting good results. Why do we have to experiment something new if whatever that we were doing is working already? And how much of a budget obviously we have to implement with the new strategy? How what does percentage, or if there's a math equation that they should know to try something new, like the newer technology?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one we face quite often, right? So I think the best answer to that is really you have to think about the long view. I mean, I've been doing marketing for 2+ decades now, and the reality is today's working is not going to be 2 years from now working, or even 2 months from now working, right? We saw even last year through the pandemic, there were things that just stopped working instantly. So we all love the sure thing. We love the sure bet. Paid ads are working, great, they're working. The reality is there's one day where that may not work. And there's also only a certain segment of the market, right? If you think about your customer base in a big picture perspective, so you have 1 million potential customers. In our world, it's smaller because of the B2B, but for just general purposes, 1 million customers, they're not all on paid ads. They're not all there, right? You can't just hook your wagon to that and work. You need to work to experiment to reach grander places in your market. So that's kind of one thought around experimentation is, yeah, like you may have something working really well, but that's not your entire market. There's more opportunity there. So experimentation takes you out of just doing that narrow focus of what's working into new market, but it also helps you prepare for a future where what's working now may not work in the future. I mean, we've seen markets grow. One of the spaces we work in is in IT services specifically, and that space has swollen greatly in the past 3 to 5 years. A place where paid ads really got super expensive, and the results went down because more people flocked to it. Right? It was working, right? It was the thing that we were talking about, the thing that everyone's talking about, and so people flocked to it. Well, then it became almost like the massive attention around that amount, the amount of people doing it just brought the effectiveness way down. So now the question is, what do you do? If you weren't experimenting, if you didn't have other, irons in the fire, so to speak, of other channels to work with, you were out of luck. And so experimentation allows you to reach more market, but also prepare for that day where the sure thing isn't working. Because when you get stagnant, when you sit in that one channel that's working, it's good for a season. And it could be good for multiple years even. That would be great. The reality is we've seen over time is that they ultimately phase out, or things change even inside of that channel. So you can think of experimentation, in a broad sense to say, oh, paid ads versus billboards versus this. But there's also even experimentation inside of a channel like paid ads, for example. Like you can be doing the same kind of ideas. What about just doing experimentation inside of that to new keywords or different, kind of perspectives, maybe display or YouTube, or even switching channels to Bing, which, it's like there's another search engine besides Google, right? There's other things out there to spread your experimentation around. Again, it's almost like investing. And we use this metaphor fairly regularly in our work. I mean, we're really almost like investment bankers for marketing firms. It's like we take someone's dollars and we invest it wisely, but we're always looking at return. And one of the, the big things is hedging your bets, right? You don't want to put all of your eggs in one particular investment. And so it's the same kind of idea with experimentation too, is to look and say, well, this is working, but let's take a part of that. One of your questions was kind of how much. We typically like roughly between 10 and 20%. It all depends on how big that budget is, into that experimental bucket. And that depends a lot on the tolerance of the customer and kind of what they want to do with it. But It's a wise investment. It's innovation. It's thinking forward. It's future proofing. It's all of these things we kind of talked about. And I think it's vital for most businesses. And I think we get called in a lot as an agency on the tail end of not doing that, where they say, hey, we've been doing marketing for 5 years and our ads aren't working anymore, our emails aren't working anymore, everything just kind of dried up. And it's because they weren't thinking in the future. They got it to a point and they just let it ride. They got to a point and they just let it ride. And so I think as we see it, again, because we're innovating so much in the market, there's always that percentage you need to put aside to experiment, to try new things, because that's where the next big moment's coming from. The next big idea is all inside of that experimentation.
Yeah, I think it's always fun to try something new, especially, if we're focusing on technology firms, there are so many companies that are way larger than most of the rest of the company, right? Maybe the top 2%. They can outspend you. They could ads you, buying ads that you're not think of. But, I like to challenge myself, sometimes too. Where are my customers are at? Most of my competitors are not. So that might be something that I would experiment to. Give you a funny example. I was watching SNL over the weekend. Elon Musk was there. Surprisingly, while it's commercial, we know that Tesla, they don't buy ads. So, but all their competitors are buying electric vehicle ads, for the commercial. So I think that was funny. They know that him being on there, that people obviously like Tesla are going to be watching it. So I think that's why they decided to put all the ads during the commercials. That was funny.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great observation. You're absolutely right. I mean, what a great opportunity when you've got really the figurehead of EV for our whole country, probably the world, on a show. I mean, what a better placement to draw that audience.
Yeah. So can you touch on RTX Framework? Please tell us what it is and how can we use that, in our marketing strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, Ride the Tornado, we talk about the RTX framework. And this comes from a kind of a short phrase, really. It's rapid thinking and execution, right? So when we think about experimentation or even just how do we create innovation in marketing, it really comes down to this kind of rapid thinking execution. You may have heard of terms like agile. I think agile gets really muddy really quickly. People all have different views of what that means and kind of how that works. And we're actually an agile marketing firm by definition too. A lot of our processes are based on RTX, so really all about goal-based versus process and things like that. So, but the big picture for rapid thinking execution is exactly what it sounds like. It's creating a process where you can kind of rapidly think and execute and assess and do that cycle multiple times. And so in the RTX framework, there's 3 steps: basically assess, ideate, and execute. And that's basically a loop. So assessing is really all about data. So as we assess, we look at what data do we have around this objective. So we're talking something paid ads or even doing something like our website. Let's look at the website and see where we are. Let's assess it. Let's understand what our bounce rates are, what the open rates are, if it's email or if it's click-through rates. We collect all that data. And from there, we ideate. And that's where the experimentation part comes in. We have a basis of understanding. And now we're going to try to experiment, do some new things. We're going to create ideas. That's where ideate comes from, to kind of impact those metrics we just looked at. So we assess, we ideate, and obviously we execute. We actually put that marketing to work and we create all of this new marketing activity. We try new ads, we try new campaigns, new creative, whatever it may be. And then we come right back around and we assess and say, how did that do? And so as we kind of complete that loop, we're constantly looking at data, creating new ideas, innovation, executing it, and then assessing to see how it worked. And we go back again. And this cycle just repeats over and over again. And that's really the kind of hallmark of marketing, especially in a time, and I talk about this early in the book. I do a little bit of a deep dive into why this is so important right now. I mean, we're kind of all, I think, a little bit like that metaphor of frogs in the pot where it slowly boils and the frogs boil alive. I mean, think about how fast things change today. I mean, things change so quickly versus 20 years ago. There's some charts in the book that talk about this. I mean, we have new social platforms that pop up in the news that have, a couple million users that you just heard about a couple weeks ago. It's like, how in the world did that get to be that many users that quickly? I mean, most of the tools we use were developed in the last 3 to 5 years. So there's just so many. Think about Zoom. Zoom was relatively obscure 3 years ago. right? It existed, but it just wasn't a thing. So if you think about how fast things are changing, the idea of putting together a 12-month marketing plan is becoming more and more kind of absurd. That's the basic idea of how we operate, what the book talks about. Long-term planning is good, there's goals, but just as you kind of chart your path from a marketing perspective or even a company perspective to have annual goals, that's about as much detail as you can put into a marketing plan. Like, yeah, we have some goals, but we're not going to stretch out and create a play-by-play, week-by-week, 12-month marketing plan anymore. Things change way too fast. You just can't do it. There's no real way to do it, I think, successfully. And that's the argument we make, and that's how we operate at New Norm. So rapid thinking execution allows you to keep goal focused, like we want to increase visits or we want to, move this metric driven, but allows you to ideate and execute and do these kind of quick iterations month over month, week over week to move towards that goal. And as new technology comes up, new changes happen, you're able to absorb them and work inside of them versus feeling like, oh no, our entire plan just blew up because, Facebook took away this feature, right? We roll with it, right? It allows you the ability to kind of be agile in that sense, to think what's new. And even if they launch a new feature, right? If, Twitter ends up getting sold to somebody, it gets folded in, right? Or something like that. Once the market shifts, you're able to do something different and you're not blown off because you're almost expecting change. You're almost anticipating it because you've got that mindset of experimentation. And that's where the kind of rapid thinking execution framework really helps a business grow, is you're no longer thinking, let's just get something stable. You almost create more of an agile racer mindset to say, okay, let's do this month and assess and see where we're going and see what's new in the world that we can take advantage of for the next month.
So if I understand correctly, so we should still set goal for, whatever that we're trying to accomplish, but how the process will change, right? When you interpret the data, maybe you try to drive more people to your website or booking more meeting or getting more email inquiries, whatever that the goals are. And then you will help them look at the data that are coming in, maybe really to adjust, maybe you spend more money on YouTube or you do more webinar or whatever that, trade show that you're doing. So then the goal is here, but then the method, I would say, can be changed, however that it's necessary. So do you think that is more agile this way? And do you think a small business can compete with talking about smaller technology firms or smaller business, can able to maneuver faster than larger company? Because larger company, they have big budget, right? But then they maneuver slower. But then obviously, they have, larger budget or more agency, more copywriter on the Rolodex. Do you think that's how maybe small business can compete with the big guys?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so I pulled it up here so you can kind of see, but you're right. The big thing here, goals are at the center of the RTX framework, right? I mean, that's really the point of this whole process. I think the idea of rapid thinking and execution can seem really kind of wild and kind of untethered and we're just going to try a bunch of stuff. No. There's a center, and there's kind of an eye of the tornado, if you will. And it is a goal. You have to be goal centric, not tactically centric. So you can't just say, oh, we're going to do email. Well, what's the actual goal behind email? Why choose email as a tactic? Is it the idea to have more brand recognition? Is the idea to have greater website visits, more website kind of longevity? What are these goals, thinking in a data perspective, you want to achieve? And that's where the wheel kind of spins around that goal. You're trying new things to hit that goal. So absolutely, you need to have that goal to be able to do that. The second part of your question is absolutely right. And so I think we could talk a long distance about this because, New North, we work with, Fortune 100 companies, and we also have some companies that would love to be on the Fortune 100, but they're smaller, right? They're in startup phases. And so I think the advantage at right now, in 2021 comes to the small guy, because again, as change increases, the ability to move is going to be on those who are more agile, more nimble, and have less circumstance, less bureaucracy, right? We've seen the power of both. Like if they got money, they can make things happen quickly, but the smaller guy may have less encumbering them. They can move quicker. They can drop an idea much faster. There's less baggage in that process. There's not a person, who just does email. And if they want to stop doing email, they got to fire somebody. It's just probably 2 or 3 people doing everything, right? So it's a little bit easier to kind of adjust. And I think the future of marketing will be more kind of agnostic to channels. They'll be more goal-based and more focused, and you'll see a lot more people who are kind of multi-talented. They may be email and designers and graphics. I think I tell people I think HTML is going to be most people's second language in the marketing space, because we'll have to develop such this broader skill set to serve, because things come and go. I mean, I'm kind of middle-aged right now. There's probably a handful of technologies that I can tell you that came and went since I've been alive, right? And the list is only going to get bigger. And I know practitioners who were amazingly talented at things like Flash, for example. You probably remember Flash, Adobe. Like, they were fantastic, action script, all that great stuff. It's gone. It's absolutely gone. I mean, entire businesses gone just because technology changes. So I think the advantage goes to the small guy right now. And that's is an encouragement to small businesses as they're listening to this, that your ability to rapidly think and execute, to kind of get to the better message, the better channel faster than the big guy, is really you're seeing a secret sauce right now. It's kind of the David and Goliath story, if you will. You have the ability to be more accurate, to kind of get in there. I mean, for a big Fortune 100 company to spin up an Instagram presence and get that figured out might take them 3 to 4 months. Could take you 3 to 4 minutes, right? I mean, it's just the scale of the complexity differs. So you have to just kind of lean in to get on those. Like, you won't see a lot of big businesses on Clubhouse for a while yet. They're thinking about it, but it just takes them so long to get through it. But some people are just on it right now, already moving through it. So I think for the small business, the RTX framework is a great resource. I mean, they should look at, so it'll help them put together really a plan of how to do this. Because I know the other side of that tension is there is so much, right? There is so much out there. There's new stuff coming out, email or email automation, or display, or buying, content marketing ads, all these different ideas. How do you kind of organize and prioritize? And that's another kind of concern, because you do have a limited budget. If you've got a $50,000 or $60,000 marketing budget for a year, how do you kind of prioritize? Because you could spend that money very quickly, obviously. Mm-hmm. So the RTX framework can help you think through that and even prioritize and put some realistic budgets inside of that to help you do that. But ultimately, to your question, I think the small guy has the advantage right now. And I think what we'll probably see in the bigger picture for more of the enterprise clients is they're actually going to probably become more fractional. They're going to break off their teams into smaller units so they can be more agile, a little more independent thinking.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you even more question on for the smaller guys, right? Because the big guys, they have the budget to experiment, right? If this doesn't work, I still have, my $1 million budget can also spend on others. But like you said, for smaller businesses, maybe I only have 50,000 for the year. If I don't spend it on the right way, then I might not have, any money to spend until I get maybe the next client, maybe the project launch. But I think, when I talk to smaller business, what they want to do is they read magazines, right? They read blogs, right? They're trying to mimic what the big guys are doing, and then they try to do it themselves. But obviously, you can't do it like the big guys, because maybe you don't have the resources, or you don't have the brand recognition like the big guys. So, would you suggest the smaller guys to even go more niche, or find whatever that works for them and just focus on it? And how would you advise some of the smaller firms out there?
Yeah, I think your initial gut reaction there is right. I mean, you shouldn't be trying to copy the big guy, right? That's not going to be a long-term sustainable view for you. They can outspend you, because typically the mediums and the channels they're using are spend related, right? If you want to be like, you're not going to put all your money into one TV ad, right? That's a very expensive kind of channel to manage. And so you wouldn't want to do that. So I think for the small business, they need to think about the customer first. And I know that sounds cliche, but I'm going to unpack that with a little bit more reality. The number one thing we see a lot in, we kick off engagements with clients, and we ask them, like, how well do you know your customer? And they say, oh, pretty well. I say, well, like, have you sat down with them for 30 minutes and just talked to them about like how they found you and their decision process for using you? And typically the answer is no. Typically the answer is, well, we kind of know, they kind of told us a little bit, but they haven't really asked explicit questions. So, and this is more in small business. Bigger businesses actually do this fairly well, I think. But the smaller guy, whether it's just entrepreneurialism or whatever it is, they're hesitant to really, really dive in and unpack the customer they're trying to reach. What are their behaviors? What are their habits? I mean, do they use social media? You can find so much kind of information, so much direction from your customer that helps kind of aid in this process as well. So the number one recommendation I always have is just really have a conversation with your customer, whether you or a teammate, invite them to lunch and just say, hey, I want to just really dig your brain about why you're working with us and why you chose us. And it may seem strange, you may have a relationship, but it'll be valuable, trust me. And I think a lot of the questions you can ask around the industry, like what do you think of companies like mine? What do you think of this space? And like what made us stand out versus others can help you with a lot in that question. The second thing I would say is yeah, the benefit of being small is you can try different things. You want to be who you are. So we typically look at some balance of both brand recognition and straight lead gen. So that's what we do, two sides of our house, branding and lead generation for New North. And so I can only prescribe what we do here. So in that sense, looking at your brand, make sure you have a strong brand, and that's going to make sure your message is aligned. You've got the right kind of brand voice that aligns to your customer. And so you're able to make sure that all your visual brand, your kind of voice, all those things aligned, your USPs, your unique selling propositions are truly aligned well. The one thing I've noticed with bigger businesses is they also have a little bit more allowance for mistakes. They can be a little bit more like iffy on things that don't work. If they spend half their budget and half it works, they're still good. Whereas if you spend half your 50, you feel really bad and you've got 25 left. So it's all about legwork, and it's the harder work for small businesses, but it's the legwork of saying, really refining it, really going back to customers and completing that loop and saying, here's what we're messaging. How does this resonate with you? Does this solve the problem, or what really do you think of? And, entrepreneurs, if we're kind of putting that into the small business aspect here, typically are more kind of front person people. They're more verbal. They kind of think they know what the customer wants. They're kind of out there. They're doing that, venture kind of work. And so it's harder for them sometimes to pause and just say, well, let me just get a full kind of take from my customer in that sense. So it's helpful to have someone else on the team who can do that. But as you pull that in, I think that's really where you're going to get a lot of value. And so for small businesses specifically, taking the RTX framework in whole is to really start looking at all the ideas that match and fit your current customer. So if it's paid media, if it's Google, everyone uses Google to some degree, but those are all channels for lead generation. And as you bring the lead generation into your website, into the experience of working with you, that's where brand kind of takes over, and you have to make sure that your brand is really strong. And by that, I means clear, right? It shows a value proposition. It shows that you've got something here that leaves an impression or sets an impression. And everything sets an impression. It's whether it's the right one or not, and then clearly communicates the value you bring and creates conversion. And so I think that's probably getting close to your answer there, but it just kind of gives a high level where I think small businesses can go with some of that.
Yeah, I love the advice, Tobin. By asking and reaching out to your current client, not only is it a very inexpensive way to do, maybe your cost is just buying them lunch or whatever, get them commit to the phone meeting or Zoom meeting. Not only that, for smaller businesses, you normally would know who your top clients are. You're small enough, by asking your maybe top 5 client why they like about you, how do they read their publication and learn about what you do, then you can know, and you can try to clone your client now, because I know that they read blogs, they go to Facebook, or they watch late night TV, whatever that may be for your case. Then now you can really know from your real paying customer where they're hanging out, where they are spending the time, gathering information, and that's where you be. So you actually it's a much better way than you have to do survey, you have to wait for the data, and this is actually real paying customer giving you real time feedback.
Yeah, I would say, I think this is I think a few people talk about this, but I know Seth Godin's popping to my mind right now. But there's really what I would call those first 10 to 20 customers that really can define your product or service, your company in the long run. And so when you develop those first, when we have really, really fresh, really green startups coming to us, people who really have maybe 3 or 4 customers and they're looking to grow and expand, sometimes we just say we can't work with you yet because you don't actually have enough customers to actually validate your product or service to begin with. And honestly, your first your first kind of revenue is always going to come from relationships. And I don't mean that they're people you're going to know, but I mean they're people you're going to have to earn a relationship with to then have them be a customer and give you that vital feedback and that vital process to shape it. I know I can think of a few startups off the top of my head right now where those initial customers became investors in the long run. Those initial customers actually gave them a lot of features and change requests that actually end up becoming part of their product or service. And so can't stress enough as well that listening process, but also just the reality that, getting those first customers, unless you're in a, fairly commoditized service in some ways or product, but to really get that initial feedback from those first 10 to 20 customers, letting them involve in your process, serve them well, but then bring them behind the curtain and say, here's how we work. Like, how can we do this better for you or customers like you, to build that up? Those who've done that work better, the next 80, customers that get to that 100 are a lot easier than those that don't do that, because they're still trying to invent the wheel. We call it viability. Like, there's just a certain level of viability. I mean, there's some great ideas out there, but as everyone says, ideas are cheap. There's thousands of apps created every day. The reality is, like, how many are actually viable? And so if you're that small of a business, if you're still in that viability stage, I would say use most of your marketing to find people directly you can bring onto your product or software and set them up and get to that 20. Don't worry about spending ads, right? Don't worry about doing things like that. Get most of those through LinkedIn networking connections. Once you get to there, then you'll have enough confirmation of viability to go out to the market saying, these are the 3 reasons why we're better than the competition, or these are the 3 reasons why. Because we've heard it over and over again. We have paying customers to prove it. So that's just a little bit of an insight there we've seen over time with that. And as you get to that larger stage, then you've got viability, you've got customers, you've got paying people coming in, and you can see more of what really is working in your business and emphasize that and get stronger towards the niche.
That's great advice. And I think, yeah, you're honest too. You tell them maybe it's not right, and you could utilize what you have and actually get decent success. And when you hit a certain point, then you can take them to the next level. So that brings me to you reference a lot of strategy that you have in the book, and I have 2 questions for you. What makes you decide to write a book? Is it because of the pandemic, you have time? Or second question would be, who should be reading your book? Is it just for technology firms or larger businesses? Who will be the right reader for Ride the Tornado?
Yeah, so it's a great story. I'm glad you asked this. So I actually wrote all of the book. I had a finished manuscript in December of 2019. So I actually finished the book before the pandemic. So what had happened for me is we got the book finished, was kind of working through publishing and all of that kind of stuff. And we were about to get towards picking our launch day. And then, we heard about Wuhan, like we heard about this stuff happening. And we were like, okay, let's see how this pans out. Last thing we want to do is launch a book in the middle of an international pandemic. So we just kind of held it. Looking back, maybe I would have gone a little bit faster with it, because the reality is it was a book designed for the year we dealt with last year, which was kind of anticipating change, managing change. And so kind of after we all kind of got through that kind of March to maybe June timeframe, it was like, hey, let's get this thing back on the burner, and we got going with it. And so that's what we got to, and didn't actually end up getting it out until January of this year. But we had some initial kind of conversations and validation process there. So it was good. The message has been received really well since we've launched it. But the book overall, New North as an agency, we serve a certain type of client, but this book came from really seeing this and kind of having this conversation that we're having now with many business owners, whether they are just personal acquaintances or in networking groups of various people we do or don't serve directly at New North. But answering the same kind of questions, like, what do you think of this? Like, what do you think of this new thing? Do you think this is going to work? Do you think I should try this? I mean, the questions you tell people you're a marketer or you own an agency, they like to kind of ask you about the newest, latest thing, or like, how do we handle innovation, or what's going to go on here? Or should I try this marketing thing? That's just the bulk of the questions we get. And so over time, I've had to personally, and as an agency, develop a way of thinking about these new things. Like, how do we handle new? Like, how do we handle mobile devices? Right? Think about when the iPhone came on the market. Like, I was alive when that was not a thing, and now it's a thing, right? Our kids are not going to know the difference between a mobile and a non-mobile device, or that world. And so I've been kind of blessed and to be on the front side of that wave, where we went from desktop Macs to 5G mobile only kind of experiences, and the HubSpots, the Google Ads. I mean, I started in this business before Google Ads, right? There was just so much that's come in the past 2 decades that is just here, and it's not going to stop, right? It's not going to stop. There are going to be more and more new, more different, especially with the whole pending legislation on privacy and cookies, and Google's already moving in that way. So the ball's going to keep spinning. Things are going to keep changing. And so I wrote the book really just to create the frameworks. I think the answer to those questions is never really in the tactic. The answer is never really about email. The answer is never really about paid ads or about print or about whatever these things are. It's all about how are you going to manage and kind of deal with the next thing that comes. And that's really what Ride the Tornado is about. Maybe the name makes a bit more sense now. Like, it's just going to keep spinning. The tornado is going to keep going. We're going to keep absorbing new things and spinning them around for a while. They're going to fly out eventually. But how do you stay on top of that in a sense where you can navigate it, take advantage of it, and move forward? So the book is ultimately for any kind of marketer, right? It can be for a business owner. It can be for a marketer, someone who's managing it. Even salespeople can actually get a good benefit from the book too, is sometimes we work with VP of sales who manages marketing underneath their department. And so just having a more of a way of thinking about marketing and thinking about experimentation and how to kind of open new spaces in a way that allows your team to experiment too, allows you kind of bring the whole holistic view of saying, let's try some things, let's move it in here, but gives you boundaries and a process to do that where you can actually step back and let your team experiment and come back and reel it in a little bit too, and kind of manage results, because you're always looking at data, always using the goal as the basis of those experimentations. We're not just trying TikTok for TikTok's sake. Like, we're trying it because it's a goal, like there's a goal we're trying to achieve with it. So it brings context to that. So I think a lot of people will benefit from the book, really, if you're just in marketing or you touch marketing to some degree, even if your own manager or your kind of VP struggles with this approach to kind of innovation and change, maybe a good early Christmas gift for them too, just to kind of put together really a way of thinking about managing change, not just what the next tactic is. Because there's, as you well know, I'm sure the bookshelves are littered with, how to do video marketing or how to do email marketing. I mean, and probably year after year, dumpsters are full of those books that just don't matter anymore. Those technologies are gone. But this is a book that I hope lasts a little bit longer, gives you an idea of really how to stay on top of change and manage it for the long run.
That's nice. So Tobin, if the viewer want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
Absolutely. So you can go to ridethetornado.com. You can get actually free chapters of the book. You can get some of the worksheets, things like that. In that also has my LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach me. It's the channel I'm most focused on right now. You can also fill out a contact form there if you want to reach out to me personally and talk more about the RTX framework or any of the work you're doing. I'd love to have conversations around this. If you ask me if you should do email marketing or not, the answer you're going to get now after listening to this podcast. But that's the best way to kind of reach me there, either LinkedIn or just go to ridethetornado.com and check out the form there.
Thank you so much, Tobin. You gave me a lot to think about in terms of marketing. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Wonderful. It's been a pleasure. Hope everyone enjoyed it, and looking forward to the next time.
Take care.
Take care.